Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and today I have for you The Stepsister by R.L. Stine. Yep, this is it. I am finally going to do it. I have a ton of requests for this book. I don't know why. I started to read this to my wife, and I realized that there are a lot of females in this book, and I can reliably do maybe 4 female voices. One of them is my little old lady voice, so if you listen to The Sleepwalker, I used it for Mrs. Courtier, I believe, for that character. So she talks like this, and she's really slow. Kind of like she's dazed and confused and doesn't know what's going on, even though Mrs. Courtier in that novel didn't and wasn't like that. So I'm going to try my best. The version I'm holding of this book is a reprint, and I got this, I think, off of abebooks.com. Abe Books, I buy a lot of books from you. You're not a sponsor of the show, but you could be. If you want to be, reach out, please. Someone tore the front page that gives a synopsis of the book, and then they taped it with regular tape, and I have to take pictures of this. It's just in such bad shape. The first pages are anyway. This is not the original cover, so I don't like this cover because I like all the original covers a lot better than this. Have you seen a cover for Best Friend 2? It's atrocious. So anyway, we're going to give this a shot. I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping that I do a very good job with all the voices. All that we can do is begin and see where we end up. So let's begin. What should I read next? I don't know. Please send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Stepsister by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street novel, Book 9. Chapter 1. I hate my hair. Emily Casey made an exasperated face at herself in the mirror and tossed her hairbrush across the room. You're just freaked out because Jessie and Rich are coming? Nancy said, lying on her stomach on the bed, an old copy of Sassy magazine in front of her. No, I hate my hair, Emily insisted. Scowling, she walked over to the bed and picked up the hairbrush from the carpet. It looks like shredded wheat, she said, returning to the full-length mirror on the closet door and beginning to brush again. How do you know what shredded wheat looks like? Nancy asked, not looking up from the magazine. You don't eat shredded wheat? You don't eat anything? Then why am I so fat? Emily wailed, pushing at the sides of her hair with her hand. You're not fat, Nancy said, flipping the pages. You're just not petite like Mom and me. You're big-boned. You're tall. You're fat, Emily said glumly. She knew she wasn't really fat. She just felt like complaining. Maybe Nancy was right. Maybe she was just freaked out because her new stepsister and stepbrother were coming to stay. She hated it when Nancy was right. I hate it when you're right, she said aloud. Why do you have to sound like such a big sister? Next would complain about your hands, Nancy said, closing the magazine and tossing it to the floor. My hands? How they're too big? That's what always comes next. First your hair, then your size, then your big ugly hands. Emily sighed. My hair is just too fine. It won't fall, it won't bounce, it won't do anything. Stop making fun of me. What's a big sister for? I don't know, Emily said dryly. She laughed. You look okay, Nancy said. Where'd you get that short skirt? From my closet? No, it's mine, I think. Emily adjusted it nervously, then pulled up the black tights she wore underneath it. Since when do you wear skirts? Nancy asked, pulling herself up to a sitting position on the edge of the bed. I wanted to dress up, make a good impression. You really are nervous? Nancy said with a smug smile. She stood up and walked over to the mirror. She was wearing designer jeans that emphasized her slight, boyish figure, and a pale green turtleneck sweater that looked sensational against her copper-red hair. Unlike Emily's, Nancy's hair was straight and smooth, and always fell right into place at the touch of a comb. Mom baked a cake, Emily said. Guess she's nervous too. It'll probably taste like cement. Standing side by side, the girls didn't look at all like sisters. How come you're so cool? Emily asked, picking the magazine up from the floor and placing it on the shelf with the others. Don't you think it's exciting that we're going to have a new sister and brother? We've met them before, Nancy said, walking over to the bedroom window and staring down at the front lawn that slopes gently down to Fear Street. It was a sunny day, warm for December. Spindly shadows of the barren trees played against the patterned yellow wallpaper. So what? Emily cried heatedly. They're coming to live with us. I mean, forever. I'm going away to college next year, Nancy said. Besides, Jessie is going to be in your room. You're the one who has to make the sacrifices. Emily stared at her sister, a little startled by Nancy's words. Emily had been so excited that she was getting a new sister her own age, she had never thought of it as a sacrifice. Maybe it was a sacrifice. Maybe giving up her privacy, giving up half her space, was a big sacrifice. She had met Jessie several times, and they'd always gotten along fine, but that wasn't the same as having Jessie actually living with her. What if she turned out to be a real dweeb? No, that's stupid, she quickly decided. Nancy was so negative. She wasn't going to let Nancy make her more nervous than she already was. Getting a stepfather, that was the big change, Nancy said, staring hard out the window, as if trying to avoid looking at Emily. Nancy never wanted to talk about Hugh Wallner, the man their mother had married 3 months before. Emily knew that Nancy didn't really like him. Emily didn't like him that much either. He was so different from their father. Both girls had to decide whether to keep their old last name or change to his, and both had decided to keep their old name. That must have hurt their new stepfather, just a little, but he was a stern, private man for the most part, and he didn't let on. As long as Mom is happy, it's okay, Emily thought, and her mother seemed blissfully happy being Mrs. Hugh Wallner. Emily sat down on the new bed near the window, the bed that would be Jessie's. She smoothed out the red and blue patterned bedspread. The mattress felt so hard and new. Jessie's great, she said. She and I had a great time at Mom's wedding. She's very pretty in a way, Nancy said. She never liked to give completely positive compliments. Suddenly, there was a rapid thumping sound out in the hall. Tiger, Emily's small white terrier, came bounding into the room, full speed as always, yipping and breathing noisily. Stay down, Tiger, Emily yelled, but she wasn't fast enough. The little dog leapt up into her lap, stood on his hind legs, and reached up to lick her face. No, my hair! Don't mess up my hair! But those were words the dog didn't understand. By the time Emily managed to pull Tiger off her, her hair on the left side was standing straight out. Oh, Tiger, I love you. Emily held him up to her face and rubbed noses with him. Even if you do destroy my hair. She let him down. Tiger, his stub of a tail flicking furiously back and forth, toddled rapidly from the room and down the stairs. Hey, they're here, Nancy cried, turning away from the window. What happens to your hair? Tell them I'll be down in a minute, Emily said with a sigh, rummaging in her dresser top for the hairbrush. It does look like shredded wheat, Nancy said, heading to the stairs. Maybe you should wear a hat? Thanks for the support, Nance. Just trying to be helpful? Nancy disappeared. Now, do come in, do come in. Emily could hear her mother at the front door, welcoming Jessie and Rich in an excited voice. You both look wonderful. We're all so excited. Where's Emily? The plane was late, as usual, Mr. Wallner grumbled. Well, they're here now. That's all that counts, Emily's mother said. Emily stood at the top of the stairs, her heart pounding, listening to the excited voices. This is going to work out fine, she thought. In fact, it's going to be fun. She took a deep breath and hurried down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Hi! She rushed forward to hug Jessie, who was in the middle of taking off her plum-colored down coat. Emily, somewhat flustered, hugged the coat instead. Both girls laughed. Well, hi anyway, Emily said. You look great. Jessie was a very pretty girl. Everything about her was tiny and petite except for her eyes, which were startlingly large and pale blue. She had long, shiny, straw-blonde hair, a beautiful high forehead, and creamy white skin. She reminded Emily of old paintings of angels she had seen in a museum. Jessie was wearing a pale blue sweater, obviously chosen because it matched her eyes and her faded jeans. Thanks, she said to Emily, handing her coat to her father. You look great, too. She had a soft, whispery voice that perfectly matched her looks. Her eyes went to Emily's hair and lingered there a while. Then she turned to Mrs. Wallner. It feels so great to be here, she gushed. I just love this house. She rushed forward and gave Mrs. Wallner a long hug. Emily saw that her mother was genuinely moved by this. Hey, let's not forget Rich, Nancy chimed in, interrupting Jessie's hug. Well, of course we won't forget Rich, Mrs. Wallner said, beaming at him. How could I forget such a handsome young man, even if he is the strong, silent type? Mrs. Wallner winked, obviously pleased with her little joke. Rich, normally as pale as his sister, turned tomato red. Well, someone's got to be quiet around here, Nancy cracked. Everyone laughed except Rich, who still looked very embarrassed by all the attention. He was thin and wiry. He seemed too tall for his body. He was blond like his sister, with short, spiky hair. He had a few pimples sprinkled on his chin, and he had enormous feet. With the white sneakers he wore, he looked just like a cartoon rabbit. 13-year-olds are so weird, Emily thought. She couldn't remember being 13, even though it was only 3 years ago. She had forced all memories of it from her mind. "What's that you're reading?" Emily asked him. He had a hardcover book in his hand. He started to raise it to show her. "That boy always has a book with him," Mr. Wallner said, shaking his head as if disapproving. It's Stephen King," Rich muttered, so low Emily could barely hear him. "Pet Cemetery. You read that one, didn't you, Nancy?" Emily asked. Nancy turned up her nose. "I don't read Stephen King anymore. Now that she's a senior, she doesn't read anything," Emily cracked at Jessie. Jessie laughed appreciatively, even though it wasn't much of a joke. "It's just so good to be here. I know we're going to be very happy," Jessie said to Mrs. Wallner in her breathy voice. "I'm sure we all will," Mrs. Wallner replied. "It'll be so neat having a sister my age," Jessie said, turning to Emily. "We can study together and go everywhere together. You'll have to show me Shadyside. We can cook together. Do you like to cook? And we can share each other's clothes, and—" "I don't think we can do that," Emily said, suddenly embarrassed. Jessie was so much smaller than she. "It's just going to be the best," Jessie gushed, and rushed forward to give Emily a hug. "I baked a cake," Mrs. Wallner said, "and I've got sandwiches all ready. I knew you'd be hungry after your flight." "I'm starving," Mr. Wallner said, holding his hands on top of his stomach. "Waiting around in airports gives me indigestion." He was tall and muscular, balding with a fringe of dark hair around his head. To Emily, he always seemed disgruntled, unhappy about something, about to get indigestion. "Before we eat, I'll bet Jessie and Rich would like to go upstairs and unpack and see their rooms," Mrs. Wallner said, ignoring her husband. "That's a great idea," Jessie said, picking up her enormous suitcase. "No, let me carry that for you," Emily said. She immediately regretted making the offer. She could barely lift the case off the ground. "I'll bring the suitcases up later," Mr. Wallner said, heading toward the kitchen. Nancy led Rich up to his room, the very narrow room that up until a few days ago had been a storage closet at the end of the hall. "Come on, Jessie," Emily said brightly. "I'll show you to our room." "Great," Jessie said, smiling at Mrs. Wallner. "We'll be down in a few minutes. I'm starting to feel really hungry, too." "I'll get everything ready," Mrs. Wallner said happily, following her husband to the kitchen. "Hey, Hugh, don't eat up everything before the kids get a bite." Jessie followed Emily up the carpeted stairs, which creaked and shifted under their feet. "Ta-da! Here it is," Emily said, ushering Jessie in. Jessie frowned as her eyes quickly surveyed the room. "Kind of small," she muttered. "Huh?" Emily wasn't sure she heard right. Jessie had such a whispery voice. Still frowning, Jessie walked over to the open window and, leaning against the sill, looked out. "Fear Street, what a name!" "It's a very interesting neighborhood," Emily said. "How long have you lived in this old dump?" Jessie asked, turning to Emily. It seemed more like an accusation than a question. About 6 years, I guess," Emily said, trying to think how old she was when they moved here. "My parents like old houses. I mean, liked. My dad, he was really handy. He loved to fix things up." "Is your mother always so cheerful and enthusiastic like that?" Jessie asked, quickly changing the subject. She rolled her eyes. "I mean, wow." She stepped back from the window and sat down on Emily's bed, then lay back, supporting her head in her hands. Uh-oh, Emily thought. Jessie is so different as soon as the adults are out of sight. She was so sweet downstairs, but now she has a whole new personality. Is this what she's really like? "Mom was just excited," Emily said uncomfortably. Jessie sat up and picked up Maxie, Emily's treasured old teddy bear. "You don't look like your mom," she said, looking Emily up and down. She's staring at my big hands, Emily thought. She clasped her hands behind her back and walked over to the desk. "No, but my sister looks like her, exactly." "I never liked red hair," Jessie said, making a face. She examined the old teddy bear, then looked back up at Emily. "There isn't much closet space in here, is there? What am I supposed to do with all my stuff?" She must have caught the wary look on Emily's face, because she immediately started to apologize. "I'm really sorry. Please, forget everything I've said up here. I'm just so nervous." "I'm nervous too," Emily admitted. "You really don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do. I was just being stupid. It's all been so hard. I mean, it's been terrible." Emily turned the desk chair around to face Jessie and sat down in it. "What do you mean?" "I mean, as soon as Mom found out that Daddy was getting remarried, she couldn't wait to shove Rich and me off on him. It's not too cool to find out your own mother doesn't want you around." "I'm sorry," Emily said softly. Rich and I have been like yo-yos, Jessie said bitterly, staring down at the carpet. It's like we've been shuttled back and forth between the two of them our whole lives. She tossed a teddy bear from hand to hand. Also, I had to leave everyone, all my friends, my best friend Deborah and I. We were really close. I miss her already. I'm really sorry, Emily repeated. I didn't really understand how hard this is for you. Well, it's tough, Jessie said, still unable to look at Emily. I'll try my best, too, Emily started, but she was interrupted by the familiar tiny thunder of dog paws. Tiger burst into the room, leapt up onto the bed, and tried to lick Jessie's face. Oh, get away, Jessie screamed, shoving Tiger away. Get off me. She shoved him hard. The confused terrier let out a confused yelp as he hit the floor. That awful dog will get hair all over my new sweater, Jessie wailed. Get him out of here. Tiger? Out, Emily said firmly. The dog didn't have to be told twice. His stub of a tail straight up in the air, he turned and trotted out. He's really very sweet, Emily said, annoyed at Jessie's violent reaction to Tiger. He's disgusting, Jessie said, searching her sweater for dog hairs. He doesn't shed much at all, Emily told her. He could have torn it, Jessie whined. Do you know what this sweater cost? It's very pretty, Emily said, a little embarrassed. To change the subject, she asked, Are you starving now? You want to go back downstairs? Yeah, I guess. Jessie moved Emily's old teddy bear from hand to hand. I was given that bear on my first birthday, Emily told her. It was always my favorite. Really? Jessie pinched the bear's nose. It's pretty tacky now, isn't it? She laughed, a whispery, high-pitched laugh. It means a lot to me, Emily replied. Guess I'll take this bed, Emily. I can't stand sleeping by a window. But that's always been my bed, Emily protested. We bought that new bed by the window for you. Well, then I think we have a problem. Jessie glared unhappily at Emily. Then she looked down and tore the head off the teddy bear. Chapter 2. Jessie laughed a startled, high-pitched laugh. Emily was too shocked to say a word. Was this really happening? Jessie quickly choked off her laughter. I'm so sorry, she said, looking down at the teddy bear head in her left hand and the body in her right hand, gray stuffing falling through the open neck. It was an accident, really. She looked up at Emily as if to see if Emily believed her. Emily didn't believe her. You pulled Max's head off, she said. For some reason, it came out more like a question than an accusation. No, it just came off in my hands, Jessie insisted. Really, I barely touched it. You believe me, don't you? Her large blue eyes burned into Emily's as if challenging Emily to agree it was an accident. Emily didn't reply. A shadow fell across the room. It was caused by clouds covering the sun outside the bedroom window. The room darkened so suddenly it gave Emily an eerie feeling. She had the strange sensation that Jessie had brought on the darkness. Emily shivered, suddenly chilled. It was a silly thought, of course, but the picture of Jessie in the darkened room sitting on Emily's bed with Max torn in half on her lap would stay with Emily for a long, long time. The shadow lifted. Hey, guys! Nancy walked into the room. She was carrying a handful of cassettes. How's it going? Do you want these back, Em? I borrowed them last week and... She stopped in mid-sentence. Hey, what happened to Max? It was an accident, really, Jessie cried, sounding very defensive. She stood up quickly and walked over to Nancy, holding up the two teddy bear parts. It just came off in my hands. Jessie's voice trembled. Nancy put the cassettes down on the desk and took the teddy bear from Jessie. Maybe it can be sewn, she said. She looked at Emily. Maybe, Emily said doubtfully. Hey, your brother sure is quiet, Nancy said to Jessie, deliberately changing the subject. She handed the teddy bear to Emily. Tell me about it, Jessie said dryly. Rich is quiet, okay, but once you get to know him, he's just about silent. Nancy laughed. Jessie laughed at her own joke. Emily still didn't feel like laughing. Jessie has a real mean streak, she thought. She's only been here a few minutes, and she's already putting down her brother. Then she realized that maybe she was being ridiculous. Jessie had just made a joke after all, and maybe the teddy bear thing was an accident. Max had been practically falling apart for years. Here Emily was, thinking the worst about Jessie when she should have been trying to make her feel at home, feel like part of the family. She is part of the family now, Emily told herself. You've got to get along with Jessie. It must be hard for Rich, Emily said sympathetically. Starting all over in a new school is rough. Tell me about it, Jessie said with some bitterness. Then she laughed, a nervous laugh. Rich is okay, I guess. He and I really don't talk much. It's hard to get close to him. He's sort of in his own world, always walking around with some creepy book in his hand. He must be the biggest Stephen King fan in the world. He even writes him letters. The room darkened again. The sky outside the window was completely gray now. The colors in the room all seemed to fade into shades of gray. I never liked Stephen King all that much, Nancy said. Of course, now that I'm a senior, I don't have time to read anything, just schoolwork and college applications, of course. Are you going out tonight? Emily asked quickly. She didn't want Nancy to get started on how hard it was being a senior and how much work she had to do. Nancy could talk for hours on that subject. It sometimes seemed to Emily that Nancy spent more time talking about how hard the work was than doing the work, and when she wasn't complaining about all the homework, she was complaining about her social life. Don't you have a date with Gary Brandt? He called and broke the date, Nancy said, shaking her head. Said he had a cold, but he didn't even have the decency to sniffle once or twice into the phone. I knew he wouldn't show. She picked up the cassettes and then let them drop one by one back onto the desk. Let's not bore Jessie with the details of my social life, she said with a forced laugh. It's been such a mess ever since... I know, Emily groaned, rolling her eyes. Ever since Josh broke up with you and started going out with me. Jessie climbed to her feet, looking very uncomfortable. Maybe I should go downstairs, she said, looking first at Emily, then at Nancy. If you two want to tear each other's eyes out or something. No, Emily said, jumping up too. Nancy and I have been over this 1,000 times. 2,000, Nancy said, brushing her copper hair back over her shoulder. She looks just like Mom when she does that, Emily thought. Nancy, you know you couldn't stand the sight of Josh anymore, Emily said, wondering why she was bothering to defend herself again. You told me you were going to break up with him, remember? Nancy flushed. She seemed embarrassed to be discussing this in front of Jessie. You're right. You're totally right, Em. In fact, I really don't know what you see in him. He's such a creep. She laughed, trying to make it all sound like a joke. She turned to Jessie. Josh's idea of dressing up for a date is to turn his sweatshirt around so the dirty part isn't back. Hey, that's not fair, Emily cried. Jessie and Nancy laughed. Why is she going into all this now? Emily wondered. Josh doesn't mean anything to Nancy. She's told me 1,000,000 times that she doesn't care that I'm dating him now. I'm hungry. I'm going downstairs, Nancy said, heading for the door. You coming? Be down in a second, Emily said, setting the 2 parts of the teddy bear on the desk. I like your sister, Jessie said as soon as Nancy had gone downstairs. She's so pretty. Are you really dating her old boyfriend? They didn't go together that long, Emily said brusquely. She really wanted to drop the subject. So, are we agreed? Jessie asked. I get the bed by the wall? Well, it wasn't settled at all, Emily thought crossly. That's my bed. And can we move that night table over to my side? Jessie asked. Without waiting for a reply, she began tugging the night table across the room. I'll have to empty it out for you, Emily said quietly. Is Jessie trying to bully me? She wondered. Is she always going to have to get her way? Is she going to boss me around in my own house? It's her house too, Emily reminded herself. It's her house too, from now on. Well, this is a real party, Mrs. Wallner said, beaming happily from the head of the dining room table. Mr. Wallner muttered agreement, a pleased smile on his usually dour face. Emily and Nancy had decorated the dining room, stringing crepe paper streamers over the doorway and over the dark green wallpaper above the buffet, and hanging big cutout letters spelling welcome over the double windows. Their mom had put a white linen tablecloth on the table, a special departure from the straw placemats they usually used. 2 dozen pink and red roses in a big cut-glass vase served as a beautiful centerpiece. Emily couldn't remember the old house ever looking this festive. How about a toast? She said, pouring some Coke into her glass, trying to forget about the unpleasantness upstairs and get into a party mood. She passed a big Coke bottle to Jessie. Do you have any diet soda? Jessie asked Mrs. Wallner. This is just too fattening. Mrs. Wallner gave Jessie a look of surprise. Don't tell me you worry about your weight, Jessie. If you got any skinnier, we wouldn't be able to see you. Mr. Wallner laughed loudly. Jessie worries about everything, he said, shaking his head. He turned to Rich at the end of the table. Rich hadn't said a word. How you doing, pal? Mr. Wallner called down to him. Okay, Rich said with a shrug. Why don't you put that book down and have some cake? Mr. Wallner suggested. Okay, Rich said, closing his book. Do you want ice cream with your cake? Emily's mom asked. Rich muttered something. Speak up, Rich. Your words are falling right into your lap, Mr. Wallner said. Yes, ice cream, please, Rich replied louder. His voice cracked on the word please. Mr. Wallner laughed at him. You sound like a boy soprano, he said. Rich turned bright red and lowered his eyes. Stop picking on him, Daddy, Jessie said sharply. I'm not picking on him, I just made a joke, Mr. Wallner said, stuffing a big forkful of the vanilla cake into his mouth and washing it down with a long swallow of coffee from his cup. Some joke, Rich muttered, still not raising his eyes. What did you say? Are you muttering again? Give him a break, Daddy, Jessie insisted shrilly. Rich pushed his chair back with a loud squeal and stood up awkwardly. Can I just go upstairs and read? He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up the Stephen King book and, without looking at any of them, hurried out of the room. "Hey, what did I do?" Mr. Wallner asked, throwing up his hands, suddenly sounding very childish. "You're always embarrassing him, Daddy," Jessie said, frowning. "I didn't mean to," he replied with a mouthful of cake. "I'll go upstairs and apologize after I finish my cake. This is supposed to be a party, after all." "Should he be reading a book like that?" Emily's mom asked, sounding concerned. "Pet Sematary is supposed to be pretty gruesome, isn't it?" "He loves Stephen King," Jessie told her. "He's a real bookworm," Mr. Wallner said, pouring more coffee into his cup. "Not like his old dad. I don't think I've picked up a book since high school." Emily glanced over at Nancy, who returned her look. Both girls were thinking the same thing. That's nothing to brag about. Both girls were also thinking how different Mr. Wallner was from their father. Emily looked at him, sitting at the table in his oversized yellow sleeveless t-shirt and baggy brown slacks with their attached elastic belt, and thought of how well dressed her father had always been. Dan Casey had been a pediatrician. He had always worn dark, serious suits with starched white shirts and conservative ties. He had been very young-looking. He had barely looked older than his 20s, and dressed to make himself look older so that the patients who brought their children to him would feel more confident. Her father, Emily remembered, had read 2 or 3 books a week, books of all kinds, which he liked to discuss with his 2 daughters. He would never have bragged about not having picked up a book in years. How could Mom have married someone so different from Daddy? Emily asked herself. Mr. Wallner was a manager in a furniture factory. He didn't even wear a tie to work. Mom had been so lonely, Emily thought. Maybe she just settled. She tried not to think about that terrible day on the lake, but she couldn't keep the memories away. It was as if they had a life of their own. Emily could be in school, taking an exam, or at a movie, or on a date, or sitting at the dining room table as she was now, and the memories would flood back to her, forcing her to relive the horror again and again. Her dad had loved to camp out. The whole family did. Sometimes they wouldn't even wait for the warm weather to come. They'd load the station wagon with equipment and drive off to a state park or a nearby forest area, and spend the weekend roughing it in the bright blue canvas tents Mr. Casey kept in the garage. That weekend they'd been camping on Fear Island, the small, uninhabited, wooded island in the center of the lake across from the Fear Street woods. The weather was exhilaratingly brisk, to say the least. A strong, gusting wind made the normally calm lake waters toss and tumble into white, frothy waves. The tents flapped noisily in the wind. It was hard to get the campfire lit, and once lit, the flames darted out in all directions, pushed by the shifting winds. The air smelled so piney and fresh, even Nancy, who had to be dragged along because she had to cancel a date with Josh, was cheered by the beauty of the woods, the excitement of being the only people for miles around. Why had Emily and her father been in the powerboat? Her memories of that terrible day were so vivid, but for some reason she couldn't remember getting into the boat, couldn't remember where they were headed, why they had decided to battle the choppy, wind-tossed waters. Maybe that was the reason. Maybe Emily and her dad had just wanted to challenge the wind, challenge the rolling dark waves. Maybe they had done it for the excitement. It wouldn't have been for the first time. She remembered Nancy and her mom waving to them from the wooded shore. She remembered them as tiny, light figures against the dark, bending trees. She remembered the roar of the small outboard motor, the bobbing of the boat, the funny, weak feeling in her knees. And she remembered how cold it was, the wet spray on her face, her dark hair so wet, flying back against her shoulders, flying in the wind. She turned to see her father, who smiled at her, his hand on the control. Drops of water trickled down the front of his blue down vest. She could see them so clearly. The outboard motor roared. The little boat seemed to fly over the tumultuous waters. It was such a wonderful feeling. The 2 of them were enjoying it so much. It all turned to horror so quickly. Emily was handing the thermos to her dad. The hot coffee had tasted delicious. Her hand was wet. The thermos slid away from her into the water. Without thinking, her dad reached for it. The wind came up with a strong, sudden wind. It felt as if the world were turning upside down. It took a few seconds for Emily to realize that the boat was capsizing. The frozen water didn't make it any more real. It was all like a dream, a strange, frightening dream. She remembered thinking, this can't really be happening. She went under. Forcing herself back up to the surface gave her time to realize what was happening. Daddy! Daddy, where are you? A wave slapped her hard. She started to choke. The overturned boat bobbed a few yards away. She swam for it, was pushed back, swam harder, still sputtering. Daddy, where are you? She grabbed the boat. It was so slippery, but somehow she managed to hold on. Another gust of wind set the waters high. She gripped the boat bottom with both hands. Daddy? Daddy? Where was he? She turned and looked behind her. She looked all around. Was he swimming back toward the island? It was a low, dark line against a gray sky. Daddy? Where are you, Daddy? He wouldn't swim away and leave her. The island was too far to swim to, especially against the current. Where was he? She remembered the panic. It filled her chest, made it hard to breathe. The panic spread over her entire body, froze her there, clinging hard to the overturned boat. It seemed like hours. It must have been only seconds. And then she saw him. He floated slowly past her, face down, his light brown hair floating on the surface of the water like seaweed.